You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. Love your fellow as yourself. I am the Lord. Also, Vayikra, when a stranger resides with you in your land, you shall not wrong him. The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as one of your citizens. You shall love him as yourself, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt. I, the Lord, am your God.
Okay, so you've got loving Hashem, loving your neighbor, loving the stranger. Right? Anyone remember the classic question? I think it was Moshe who said, is love a simple thing? How can you command love? I often say, how can you command someone to love God? Let me extend that. How can you? Never mind that. How can you command someone to love other people? You know, how can you command someone to love their neighbor? How can you command anything? Anyone remember the answer? Anyone know the answer?
No.
Question is, how can you command someone to love God or to love your neighbor? The answer is you can't. It's something you have to work on, right? So whether that's through 25 years of ironing shirts and washing clothes in Fiddler on the Roof, right? Or Ahavat Yisrael. We're very quick to throw out phrases like Ahavat Yisrael, you have to love a fellow Jew just the same as you. But do we put it into practice? Do we feel it? And if not, how do we train ourselves to feel it, right? Or love for our family, love for the stranger. Anyway, we find in Judaism this quite often referred to. Judaism places love, whatever that is, at the center of things. Right? If we look at the second quote there, famous piece of Talmud. And here we go. Oh, 1 second. No. Famous piece of Talmud, if I can get my thing to work. Sorry. All right, the golden rule of every religion. Who wants to read that? Anyone want
I'll do it. Yeah, I'll do it.
on.
I'll do it. Right. There was another incident involving one Gentile who came before Shammai and said to Shammai, "Convert me on condition that you teach me the entire Torah while I am standing on 1 foot." Shammai pushed him away with the builder's cubit in his hand. This was a common measuring stick, and Shammai was a builder by trade.
I think they basically
The same
gave him a smack
Gentile,
with a ruler, pretty much. Yeah.
The same Gentile came before Hillel. He converted him and said to him, "That which is hateful to you, do not do to another." That is the entire Torah, and the rest is commentary.
Right, famous quote, on 1 foot. This is the on 1 foot, right? Teaching the Torah on 1 foot. Hillel said, he didn't say love your neighbor as yourself. He said a rewording of it, slightly different. That which is hateful to you, do not do to others. This is the entire Torah, the rest is commentary. But it's basically the corollary of love your neighbor as yourself. Right, Rabbi Akiva paraphrased it famously, right? He says, this is a klal gadol b'Torah. Rabbi Akiva said, a very important central pillar of the Torah is love your neighbors yourself. But Judaism is very much founded on love, loving God, loving your neighbors yourself, loving this one, loving that one, loving the strangers. Okay, the institution of marriage also is very central to Judaism. It's not only about love, it's about other things as well. Let's have a look. Why does God say that we've had this before. Oh, before that, let's have a look at Albert Einstein. Who wants to be Einstein? Anyone? Anyone feeling smart today?
I'll go for it.
Okay, Brian's going to read Einstein. Okay.
There's an almost fanatical love of justice that makes me thank my lucky stars that he was born a Jew.
Sorry, that should be that I was born a Jew. I forgot to paraphrase that. Okay, this is in a book that Einstein wrote in the 40s. I think it was published. The World as I See It. So he said basically what does he love about being Jewish? Is this love of justice. We joke about Jewish lawyers. lots of Jewish lawyers, but there's always been a centrality of justice and fairness, right? Sometimes it manifests itself in the fact that often the champions of liberal causes are Jews, particularly in America. So we've got love and we've got justice. Why is God so enamored with Abraham that he wants him to be the father of his nation? We've had this quote recently as well. Who would like to read?
I'll read it if you like.
Please.
For I have singled him out that he may instruct his children and his
Posterity.
what?
Posterity.
Posterity to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is just and right, in order that the Lord may bring about for Abraham what he has promised him.
Right. So, we've got love and we've got justice, right? God says it's because Avram will instruct his children in the way of doing what is just and right. Yeah, interesting. Right. So, we've got love and we've got justice. Let's see how this relates to this week's Sedra. Right, we all know the story, I'm sure. Iris kindly read the summary. My computer's just frozen. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So just recall what's happening this week's Sedra. We have Jacob who flees his brother's wrath because of the theft of the birthright, goes to his uncle Lavan, falls in love with Rachel, works 7 years to marry her. Right, the wedding night comes and he is deceived by Lavan, wakes up and finds that he's actually got Leah instead. Jacob confronts Lavan and Lavan says, right, ultimate chutzpah, if you like, it's not the dumb thing to marry the younger before the elder, right? It's like the chap who kills his parents and claims to be an orphan. You know, it's not proper etiquette for me to allow you to marry the younger daughter before the older daughter. Right, well, you didn't mention that before the wedding, did you? And then, of course, he tells him he can marry Rachel as well for another 7 years' work.
Can I ask a question, Rabbi?
Yeah.
Where was it Isaac
Go on.
and all this? I mean, why didn't Jacob speak to his father and complain? You know, where was the other members of his family? Is
They
that
were all
stated?
they were all back wherever it was they lived, and he was in Haran.
He didn't
Yeah,
have.
it was
Yeah,
like
but
in the
how
old
many
days when, you know,
A long way.
How many miles away was that?
I
A
don't know
very
how
long
many
way.
miles
It was a
it
long
was,
way.
but
Well, maybe
remember that even if you go back to the shtetls of Eastern Europe, I've often said this in relation to halachic rulings and Pesach and things like that, that back in the day, you basically didn't know what went on beyond your own shtetl, right? You lived in your own bubble. Whoever traveled to other cities or other communities, it was very unusual. You had the odd traveling salesman, or, you know, people who would go around and preach. Most people lived in their own kind of, you know, liberal in their own community. We didn't have so when someone left home to go find their fortune, or to go to a different city, or to go to their family, you know, they didn't hear from them for years. They'd send messages, and, you know, but think about when people. I had a great uncle that went to live in America in the 1950s, and nobody spoke to him for years. Nowadays, you'd be on FaceTime or Skype, not Skype anymore, whatever. But back in that day, you know, somebody moved, WhatsApp, yeah. If somebody moved, or Zoom, but if somebody moved abroad, that was it. You know, I have an uncle and I made Aliyah in the 70s, and even then, you know, in those days, it cost £1 a minute to phone, £2 a minute to phone Israel. Who phoned Israel? We phoned them like twice a year just to see how they were doing, and we wrote letters. So the answer to that, I think, is that, first of all, Jacob was a grown man. His father was getting old. But secondly, the practicalities of communication, you know.
After all, Jacob had gone to
We have our
gone to Haran to get away from Esau. So he must have been far enough away that Esau couldn't easily get at him. So by the same premise, Jacob couldn't get in touch with his father so easily.
My other thought is that it's a relatively modern concept that you go crying to your parents.
yeah.
You know, that parents bail out their children even when they're older. You know, it could be in those days, although we know that Isaac was 37 at the Akedah, so you know, he did still live with his parents or whatever. But it could be probably that people had more self responsibility in those days. You didn't expect your parents to bail you out.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he could have. I don't know if they had a system of justice, but I mean, if something like that happened nowadays, you'd sue the person. You'd say, I was misled. I was sold a bad bill of goods.
Fraud.
Fraud, yeah. You'd sue for fraud.
Yeah, it's always think that years ago when you went on holiday for 2 weeks, you never got in touch with your family. Now you've got to be in touch with them every single day. It's
Interesting. The one that still seems quite hard is when people are on cruise ships, they can't always get hold of them. Well, I don't understand that because they must have internet and satellite phones and things.
you've got to pay for it.
That's it. So often if there's been a bereavement and somebody's on a cruise, it's very hard to get hold of them. So I think the answer to that, Mark, is number one, people probably didn't rely on their parents as much.
That's right.
To bail them out. And number two, communication. The bigger question is why Yaakov didn't just complain to the local fraud office or whatever. But listen, he didn't. So we have a very interesting phrase.
The elders at the gate.
Sorry?
Sorry, yes?
He should have
Sorry?
complained to the elders at the gate.
Yeah, the elders maybe, yeah. The elders.
I said he should have complained to the elders at the gate, the elders of the village or the town.
Yeah.
But they usually convened at the gate, didn't they?
That's correct. Entrance to the city So, what does Yaakov say after? What does the Torah tell us after that? Very interesting.
Well, Jacob agreed to work another 7 years, but as long as he could marry Rachel straight away, he didn't have to wait another 7 years for her.
Right. So those of you who know the story will know that the commentaries say that they weren't totally stupid at all, and that they suspected something like this would happen, and that Rachel had already arranged a secret sign with Yaakov so that he would know it was her. But at the last minute, the commentaries say that out of pity for her sister, she told her the password of the secret code, basically. So that was very nice. But let me ask you a question: was it a household filled with harmony and peace? Well, we know it wasn't, because
with trickery.
Well, first of all, the whole thing
come about through trickery.
Right. How would you feel if you realized you were married as, by accident, basically? I didn't want to marry you. I wanted to marry your sister. Right. And on top of that, the whole business of having children, and who had the children, and giving out their handmaidens, and I don't think they had a close relationship, Rachel and Leah. It doesn't sound like it. So interestingly, we find a very interesting thing, because language is a funny thing. Let's see what the Torah tells us about Yaakov's love for his wife. Right. Would you like to read that? Nice and short. Who hasn't?
I will. And Jacob also loved Rachel more than Leah, and he served him another 7 years.
Right. Let's just look at that phrase for a minute. He loved Rachel also more than Leah. Does that sound like good language, good use of language?
Definitely not.
Right. Either it's also or it's more than. It's a little ambiguous. Right, we know the answer. The answer is he probably loved Rachel more. By the way, you're not supposed to marry two sisters post giving of the Torah. I can think of good reasons why, not least this kind of thing. The tensions that will arise.
That's why it's forbidden. That's why it was forbidden when the Torah was given.
Correct. It's a very fractious situation. There's a famous question that's asked, by the way. How could Yaakov marry two sisters? We know that the patriarchs kept the Torah, many concepts of the Torah before it was given. Did they really not know about the idea that we weren't going to be marrying two sisters? And yet he did it. So there's a whole explanation there, because he promised he wasn't going to embarrass Leah by basically refusing to marry her, and he ended up marrying the two of them. But in the end, it all worked out, and they had 12 kids between all of them. But it wasn't without its difficulties and tensions. It's a very tense situation. And this verse, I'm not even sure it's translated so well, but it basically alludes to tension, because it says he also loved Rachel more than Leah. What do you mean? So it's not also, it's actually more. So why does it use such a sort of strange
Because he loved Leah as well.
right, he loved her as well. The answer that the commentaries give is that it is a deliberately ambiguous phrase that doesn't quite sit well with the use of language, because it's not an easy situation. It's not a black and white situation. He loved Rachel also, actually loved her more than Leah. He did love Leah. So what's going on? How do you quantify that love? And that phrase and the sort of bad grammar, if you like, you wouldn't say X also loved Y more than Z. You'd either say also or you'd say more than. They're constructs. It's a very strange sentence. It's a fractured syntax, basically, which alludes to a fractured relationship. We find this somewhere else, by the way. Let's have a look at something which occurred a few weeks ago in the Torah. Reading. Very interesting, very famous this. So this is from Bereshit, where Cain kills Abel. Okay? Who'd like to read that?
I'll read. Cain
Right.
said to his brother Abel, and when they were in the field, Cain set upon his brother Abel and killed him.
Okay, the ... is very deliberate there. In the Hebrew, it's basically Vayomer Cain el Hevel achiv. Cain spoke to his brother Hevel. We're not told what was said. Clearly, they had words, quite literally, because it ends up with a murder, right? So, as you'd say in English, Cain and Abel had words. Then they were in the field, and Cain killed his brother. So it doesn't tell us what those words were. Again, it's a fractured sentence. Cain had words with his brother. Whatever those words were, it caused him to be so angry ultimately that he murdered his brother. So the law is an accurate translation. Maybe I cut and pasted this from Safario, which is a resource, but maybe actually I should translate it as Cain and Hevel had words. We're not told what those words were. And then we find they're out in the field and he sits upon his brother and killed him. What happened? I don't know. We had words. It's more than words. Why aren't we told? Again, it's a slightly ambiguous kind of a sentence, which isn't really grammatically. You can't say, right, Vayomer Cain el Hevel achiv. Normally, when the Torah says Vayomer, Vayomer means and he spoke, right? So the Torah is telling us Cain spoke to Abel. Yeah? No? What did he say? They were in the field and there was a murder. No one tells us what they actually said. So again, it's a misuse. It's not grammatically correct. So again, when does the Torah do that? Where the grammar's a bit weird, where it's basically an unhealthy, dysfunctional situation. It's reflected in the language. Interesting. The language is dysfunctional. It doesn't fit grammatic norms. Very interesting.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's other examples of that. These are specific examples. And now it gets worse. Right. Going back to Jacob and Jacob and Rachel and Leah. What happens next? So just after the Torah, right, the previous verse we said that Jacob loved Rachel more, but he also loved Leah. What happens next? What does the Torah tell us next? All right. Who wants to read number 8? Who hasn't read yet? Deborah, you want to read? Farrell?
I'll read. And the Lord saw that Leah was hated, so he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren.
But she wasn't
Was she hated?
Right.
What did we just say? She was loved.
Yeah.
I think it just means that she wasn't loved as much as her sister.
Well, hated is quite a strong word.
It's a very strong word. And by the way, it's reflected in the name she gives her children. Ruvain means God has seen my misery. Shimon, God has heard my misery. Levi, at last my husband will be attached to me and accompany me. So she named her kids, right? It'd be like calling your kids misery. You know, if your kids were born during lockdown, calling them, I don't know, misery, depression and sadness. Well, you wouldn't do that, would you? So hate is a very strong word. I actually think this is a very powerful verse. Because what it's really saying, presumably, is, of course she wasn't hated. We just said Yaakov loved her, right? So she was less loved. For her, that was like being rejected.
Isn't this something to do with that she should have really married Asaph?
yeah, that was one of the plans, and she didn't want to, and so on and so forth. Yeah, there is definitely they say that. Here's a thought, which fits very well with what we understand nowadays. You know, when you have a lot of children, they get into arguments, and one gets upset by something the other one said, and you say, "I didn't mean to upset them." Okay, but it's the perception of the victim, and we understand more nowadays about validating people's feelings. I think this is quite a far-reaching verse, because I think if you would insert a few extra words to make this a bit more clear, what this verse would really say is, and the Lord saw that Leah in her eyes felt hated.
Yeah.
But the Torah is saying that she was hated, but she wasn't hated. Just said Yaakov loved her. So I would venture to say this is very contemporary in understanding that it doesn't matter if he loves her. As far as she's concerned, he doesn't love her enough, and therefore she feels hated. Not to suggest in any way that it's an abusive relationship, but surely you would say that would be pretty true pretty much any dysfunctional or abusive relationship. The person would say, well, I love her, I shower her with gifts. She'll say, I don't feel loved by you. Anything but, oh, but I do all the right things, I tick all the right boxes. Well, that's not always enough.
Well, she couldn't have been able to have so many children, could she?
Sorry?
She couldn't have been so hated that she had so many children from him.
Well, you know, you hear about people, particularly in the more religious community, that have been in an abusive marriage and it's finally broken up after 10 years and they have 5 kids. So people somehow manage to procreate even when it's a dysfunctional relationship. I don't know what to tell you. I know you would think that, right? But somehow there isn't a correlation there. I don't know. There's all kinds of reasons for that. I think one reason is that the human instinct and need for intimacy isn't always necessarily in parallel with the need for affection and love. So you can have a marriage or a situation where, well, look, the extreme is obviously you can have sexual violence. So clearly, the act of intimacy and the emotional attachment and love that goes with it are not always the same thing. So in the extremity, unfortunately, somebody can be attacked. But perhaps a slightly less extreme version would be a dysfunctional relationship where they're still managing to produce kids. So clearly they're capable of intimacy, but at the same time doesn't make everything all right. You know,
not emotionally okay.
Look, we see quite clearly, and I've said this before, it's funny. Now we get up at weddings and we talk about how beautiful it is, 2 halves of a soul coming together when people get married, and you know, it's the soulmate. Well, in those days, people had lots of wives. You know, in those days, clearly women were seen as baby factories, baby machines, to the extent that Rachel says, I am nothing if I don't have a child, and I'll let my husband can basically have my handmaid, and if he has children with her, it'd be like I've had children with him.
Yeah.
You know, people say nowadays, you know, people complain that if women don't give birth, then they're not seen as, you know, okay, society's changed in that regard, but still there's a kind of, women are there. One of the things that women do is have children, and you know, it's quite a central function. And if you can't have children, then you suddenly feel, you know, inadequate or whatever. Clearly back then there was a big emphasis on producing heirs. And it's like the royal family, isn't it? In a way, you know, people excited because Kate Middleton had a boy first, and it's heir to the throne, and blah blah blah. Yeah. So I think it's a very interesting phrase. This, she wasn't hated. The Torah just told us she was loved. So what it probably means to say is, in her eyes, she felt hated. And to be honest, it doesn't matter if she was or wasn't. She felt that way. That's her feeling. And Rachel was barren. And in a society and culture, and remember, by the way, in a few weeks, I think is it next week's Sedra? This week's Sedra. When Rachel says to Yaakov, please pray to God that I should have a child, what does he say to her? Anyone remember?
But you're loved enough for loved enough.
No, he says something very nasty.
Does he say that he's not God?
He says, what are you talking to me for? I'm not God. He says, he doesn't quite say this, but something to the effect of, I'm not the one with the problem. I've got kids with my other wives. It's your problem. Which is very nice at all. Now, the commentaries say that he only did that in order that she should feel so pressured that she cries out to God, and God will hear her prayers. But look at this, right? Leah feels hated. the divine providence is that she has children, Rachel doesn't. That's a very big deal. Even though Yaakov may love Rachel more, love isn't always enough, by the way. Right? Often say that. So look what's going on here. It starts with love. Jacob falls in love with Rachel at first sight. Right? He worked 7 years for her. Right? Abraham and Sarah were married already when we met them. Isaac's wife was chosen by his father's servant, but Jacob basically chose his own mate. He's emotional, falls in love. And we see that love alone isn't enough. Interestingly, by the way, the word love appears 11 times in the book of Genesis, and each time it's in the context of a conflict, usually a sibling conflict. Somebody loves their son more, or somebody loves their wife more, or so it's usually causes trouble. Even when it comes to the Akedah, right? What does God say to Abraham? He says, take your son. Oh,
Who
sorry,
you
1
love.
second. Right, we have this also, right? We'll skip that for a minute, actually. Right, take your son, your favorite son, whom you love. Again, it's all about the love. What's the significance of that? Because we're told that the Satan said to God, Avram will never do it. You'll see he loves his son more than he loves you. In the end, he proves him wrong. But the point is, again, it's not conflict. It's connected to controversy. So we have to love God. We have to love humanity. We have to love our fellows. And yet every time we find love mentioned, particularly in a family context, in Bereshit, it's usually in the context of fractiousness. So it's a strange thing. Very strange thing. Right? We find the theme of love. L'chadodi, come my bride. Yeah, is about love. It's an analogy of the bride and groom. You did nefesh. If you look at the translation, it's all about the beloved of the soul. Right? The whole book of Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, is an allegory of a love poem. We talk about loving God. It's very interesting. So on the one hand, we're commanded to love. On the other hand, when it actually happens in the Bible, it's usually quite controversial.
Yeah, because we're commanded to love God, to do His will. But when you're talking about people don't want to do other people's wills.
Right. So we talked earlier about justice, right? God said that Avram will be a person who practices justice with his fairness and impartiality, I suppose. So the answer is that clearly you need both. God doesn't say Avram will be the father of my nation because he loves. Although, by the way, he was a person of chesed. He was a giver who gave to everyone. God says, I see that he will be a person of righteousness, of justice. And yet we're commanded to love. So it would seem the answer is that you need a balance. You need love, but you need justice and fairness as well. I mean, to give you a ridiculous example, people go off, when somebody's in an unsuitable relationship, right? Which, depending on your definition, I suppose, could be somebody's dating somebody who's not Jewish, or somebody's married and they're being unfaithful. And they say, what could I do? I fell in love. Well, okay. Sorry, that's not always good enough. Forbidden love, right? We often hear about. So love on its own isn't always the answer. It has to be measured with justice. Otherwise, it's not fair. That's basically the bottom line. So all you need is love, as the Beatles said, not strictly true. You need it to be measured by fairness and justice. And the proof is that every time it's love alone, something goes wrong. Even with Yaakov and Rachel, something goes wrong. Basically. Very badly wrong. Doesn't work. So there's no happy endings for romantic. It's not like in Hollywood at all. The closest we get to Hollywood is probably certainly Jacob when he falls in love with Rachel at first sight, but even then, it's fraught with challenges and difficulties. So there has to be a balance between other things. Now, in terms of loving your neighbor, loving God, again, also there has to be balance with a sense of justice and fairness. Otherwise, you have situations where I love God, I'll do something that's completely wrong and immoral. No, it doesn't work that way. Again, justice, right? Order, discipline, very important. Okay, any questions? Let's stop that for now. I mean, if we look at, history, I don't know the statistics, but, how many crimes happened because of so-called crimes of passion,
Plenty.
I mean, if you include abusive relationships in that, I'm not deigning to suggest that abusive partners are off the hook, but they will no doubt claim to love their partners, and yet, you know, they're often happy to harm them, possibly even kill them. So we see the corruption of, you know, the corruption of the idea of love, unfortunately. Twisted love as well. So clearly,
People kill their wives to marry to marry someone else.
whenever you hear the statistics from, it's JWA Shabbos, I think, this week actually, and whenever you hear this, was it last week? I don't know, because we weren't in shore. When you hear the statistics, you know, it's always like a woman is killed by her partner every, what is it, 20 seconds or something crazy like that. It's shocking. Shocking. I'm sure some of them are loveless relationships. I'm sure some of them they might have thought previously were functional relationships. So we see love on its own, not only is it not enough, it can be very potent, it can be very dangerous. So in Judaism, we say it has to be measured by justice. Now, I'm not saying Lavan was right, by the way, with what he did, but it's an interesting one.
But Rabbi,
Yeah.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
So you can't. You said you can't marry two sisters, but God forbid one of the sisters dies. Can you marry the other sister?
Well, we know that in
Is
fact
that
the Torah initially told us that you're supposed to do that, right? It said if a woman died childless, sorry, no, if a man died childless, his brother was supposed to.
Yeah.
Yes, if you can't marry two sisters at once. We're not given a specific.
And you can't
time for
marry
that.
two sisters when one of them, when they're both still alive, can you?
Not sure.
I think
right.
the law says that once one of them has died, then you can marry the other one. But while they're both still alive, you can't divorce one and marry the other one.
That sounds right. I know of a case where somebody
Is that in English law?
English law? It's a very interesting question. Don't know the answer to that.
No, it's not in English law. You can do that. You can divorce a sister and marry another sister.
I know somebody in Manchester who, young at the time, was a young father with a number of children. His wife died very tragically shortly after childbirth, and he ultimately remarried his sister-in-law, who obviously presumably was younger and unmarried. I'm assuming that. I don't know how that works exactly, but
Well, I think that's okay. I think that is
no,
okay.
no, of course it's okay halakhically. I'm saying in terms of, you know, the family dynamics there. I assume that she was a willing participant, and that there wasn't there a film about that for the Jewish Film Festival. Is there an Israeli film about that? Do you remember that? Came out a couple of years ago. A girl that was expected to marry her sister died, and she was expected to marry the husband. Do you remember that film?
Yeah, it rings a bell.
Don't remember what it was called.
She probably stepped in to help him to start with.
I'm guessing that may well be the case. She may have come over to help, and then, you know, they may have become closer, and, you know, things happen. Yeah, you can see the problem with being married to two sisters and the potential division and machlokas and so on, as we see from the Bible. Not recommended. Not recommended. Interestingly, I know of a brother and a sister who married a brother and a sister. Obviously.
Oh, I do as well.
I
do as well. Two brothers married twin sisters.
Right. So it happens, you know. So in this particular case, yeah, the brother married the sister, and then the other sister married the brother. But I also know of a case where two brothers married two sisters, which is always a good, and it was a shidduch situation. So that's always a good sign. It means that at least the mechotanim get along. If they're, you know, a few years after their children got married, they say, "Oh, our other children should get married as well." It's always a good sign that everyone's getting along, I guess. It's not so far-fetched, I suppose. I mean, often people are more likely to have come across each other in that situation, particularly in a more religious community. So I suppose it makes sense.
In my family tree research, I found that actually going back in my family, there were three brothers who married three girls from the same family.
Right.
Ah, keep it in the family.
Yeah.
Well, I think I told you the story. I'm sure I've told the story before of a lady who had written into a magazine saying, I really enjoyed the article about Cholent last week. And she says, as a great grandmother myself now of many years, I still remember my mother, the late Mrs. whatever her name was, Sarah Halberstam. Her Cholent was the best. She used to put this and that in it, blah, blah, blah. Signed Mrs. Leah Halberstam, right? Same last name. So somebody wrote the following week saying, very interesting letter, but I'm kind of surprised that Mrs. Halberstam, who says that she's a great grandmother and presumably has been married for many years, is still using her maiden name. So she writes back the following week saying, dear so-and-so, they obviously don't know us Halberstams. I married my second cousin. My maiden name is my married name.
Oh, that's funny.
Oh.
There are certain names. I think the Bobov Rebbe's name was Halberstam. I think Vishnitz as well. So like quite often people ended up with the same name after they got married if they were distant cousins or whatever. Yeah. Makes life a lot easier. You know someone called Cohen that married someone called Cohen. Don't have to change all your ID documents.
Not leaving.
Right, I think we'll pause there. Please don't forget the Harold Weinberg lecture tonight at 8 o'clock. Should be very interesting.
Yes, that's right.
What's that about, Rabbi?
The title is,
The history of Jews of Redbridge and
then I'll look it up.
area.
Jewish history of, I'll tell you the exact title in a minute. Redbridge, Epping and Waltham Forest, which is quite a tour guide, Joel. He's a tour guide and a historian.
They're always interesting.
Yeah.
Is that on this Zoom channel?
Be on the same Zoom, yeah, 8 o'clock tonight. Same details.
Look forward to it.
Is that the one by Nigel Grizzard?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he's my third cousin, I think.
Oh, there you go. So you definitely have to come then.
Yeah. No, because his grandfather and my grandfather were brothers.
Oh, very nice. Okay.
Yes.
So that makes your third cousin, does it?
Rabbi.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure.
Second cousin, surely.
Once removed.
Rabbi.
Second cousin
Yeah.
once removed.
Yeah.
That film that you were referring to is called Fill the Void.
That's it, yes. I think it's on YouTube actually.
Okay.
I don't know how authentic it is, but
Brilliant.
yes.
He's in there.
Fill the void, yes. That sounds right. Before Stissel, they always used to have like these films in the film festival, Israeli sort of films about the Haredi community and this kind of thing. I don't know how realistic they were. And then it's interesting because Stissel came out and made it all of it mainstream. So it's probably not as people will say, oh, I know about it already. But yeah. Right. Okay. See you later, everyone. 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take care.
Bye then.
Yeah, see you later.
Have a nice day.
Have a good day.
Julian,
Bye.
Bye.
Yes, Jeff.
wish you long life.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
I
I
was
wish you a long life.
I can see you. It's
Oh,
not-
yeah. Sorry. Wish you long life. Yes. That's Wednesday, isn't it?
Thank you.
Wish you long life.
That's
Yeah.
for Wednesday.
you.
Wish you a long life.
Yeah, Tuesday night, Wednesday.
Yeah, okay, bye. Bye.
Bye.
I've made Kaddish arrangements now.
Oh, good.
We should be back in shul, shouldn't we? Because they said that religious services can start.
Next week.
Well, no, not this
Next
week.
week.
No, after the lockdown.
We hope so.
See what Boris says
They
tonight.
just-
I think that's what they said
Yes, they
They
today.
have said that place of worship will reopen.
But we're
But we'll
not
see.
certain about carol services, so we have
Oh, I'm very concerned. Absolutely.
We'll
yeah.
just have to cancel.
well, we might not. Let Carol stay outside. Okay.
Right.
Bye, everybody.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.